name's Scott Self. I currently still working for myself, no pun intended, but about to start going on full-time with a company called Mobomo out of DC area, actually in Reston, Virginia. And they're a great agency, do a lot of government work, obviously, imagine in DC. This particular talk is, I've already did this at Drupal GovCon, so if you went to GovCon and saw this, sorry, it's not much different. But a little bit different. Things have changed a little bit, but not much. But this is basically a case study, so it's completely centered around the work that we've done with USGS, so the US Geological Survey's website. So, of course, being that it's government, here's your legal disclaimer. They don't endorse us. It's just a case study. There you go. It's there. So, from the beginning here, what were the requirements on this project that led us to use organic groups in the first place? So, once upon a time, back in the bad old days, as it were, this is a huge organization. Maybe you don't realize how big the USGS is, but it's actually the largest scientific body within the government. So employs far more scientists than like NASA or any other organization that's scientific. But each little center, as it were, like Oklahoma Water Science Center or the Northern California Volcanic Activity Monitoring Station or whatever, like all these different little things that make up the USGS, each little piece, almost every little piece had its own little subdomain or its own little public website. So you'd have, nywater.usgs.gov, and they had their own little world. So we have 608 initially that they figured out how many different subdomains there were. 327 of them they decided right off the bat that we could convert. I'm not sure how they decided that, but overall there was over 3 million pages, 300 plus known developers on different websites, so you can imagine the confusion that could cause. Search, obviously there really isn't one because it's not coherent. It obviously can't, Google, I guess, is your only search criteria that sort of brings it all together, but not really. Navigation between sites, you may or may not get the link path right. Who knows, from one subdomain trying to link off to the main site and vice versa, whether it would actually connect. So you have this inconsistency with poorly designed sites, real ugly old sites that hadn't been touched in a decade or more. Labeling of little things like, really important things, but it would be using a different label. So little things like the official name for like their climate change section was climate and land use change. So that was the official headquarters label for that area, that mission area. But you'd have other places and different websites, and different subdomains would just call it climate change or just land use change or land change. So you have this inconsistency, which it's not good for a government thing. And even if you think about it from a branding perspective of a corporate type perspective, it's not a good thing. So you have a lot of developers, different turnover, people coming and going, no knowledge transfer happening between websites and things like that. So the technologies alone, there was sites with, Java and .NET stuff, quite a few PHP sites. Some of them were Drupal, some, never heard of Drupal, etc. So you can see the kind of mess that they're trying to clean up with this project. So at a higher level, this is kind of the way that the USGS is organized. You've got these, and I just put microsites and groups and question marks here in the top here. You've got science centers and cost centers. So you've got science centers and labs, observatories, different places that study the water in this particular part of the country, whatever. And then you have a kind of a higher level mission areas and programs thing. You can see the examples there. But those are kind of overarching themes of things that they study. So, ecology and natural hazards and different things. There's 11 of them initially. They have this regional and state level sort of organization going on, which is actually sort of being phased out right now, some part of the project that we're working on now, to kind of get rid of this regional thing, because there isn't really any hierarchy within the organization. It was sort of just a grouping, geographic grouping. And then you have this science support section, so it's things like administration and budget. The Office of Communications and Publishing has its own little world. So that's kind of the high-level organization of the USGS overall. So the primary needs in this particular project was, okay, well, each site still needs to have its own little world, right? We can't, New York Water is still its own little place, and they do certain things because of the nature of what's in New York and the topography and whatever else, versus, water way down in the bayou, or whatever, you name it. There's just too many differences. So everybody has their own little world, but you still have this need for people who aren't involved in, say, so if you're a mission area, the water mission area is a great example, because it's a pretty big group, but you've got all these different centers, and they're not organizationally directly a part of the water group. They're part of their own little cost center, which is sort of underwater. But you still want them to be able, so when they create content, obviously it's water related, so you kind of want it to show up in the water world as it were. And then this other, the next bullet was about group specific taxonomy vocabularies. So each different, like New York Water may have something about runoff in the metropolitan area that's a little bit different than dealing with swamp water down in southern Florida, right? So they're different, and they have different needs. They needed to have this kind of specific taxonomy that they could use to label their own stuff. And again, with the consistency overall was a big part of the project, and just to kind of homogenize everything overall for the whole organization. Another big need was to be able to convert sites. Like I said earlier, there was only a small portion they felt were ready to bring on to this Drupal platform, right? So you've got a little over half of the sites they were ready to do right out of the gate. But over the course of time, we needed a repeatable process to say, okay, this group is ready to come on. How do we bring all of their stuff from this random platform that they were on before, which could be anything, into our Drupal world, right? Let's see. So organic groups, so show of hands real quick, anybody who has not used organic groups? All right, cool. So most people in here have, a few have not. Organic groups is the exact use case for this situation. I mean, it was either that or have some insane permissions thing with it just didn't make any sense to try and come up with any kind of custom solution. So organic groups, yay. OG's been around a long time, so it's really well developed. It's got props to the contrib community again. So organic groups does a few things. If you're not familiar with it, I'll just recap real quick. Any entity can be a group, theoretically. Nodes typically are your groups. And also any entity type can be group content. So it's owned by a group, as it were, and it's governed by organic groups, roles, and permissions that are separate from Drupal's high-level roles and permissions. And we'll look at that a little bit more later. The users can belong to groups, so they have membership in a group, which again you have the roles and permissions within that group that can govern their membership. Default views, pages, and blocks. Oh, there's a few built-in things with organic groups that comes with it for like managing the group and seeing the group's content, and block that you can just drop into a page that has all of that group's content. Again, with the roles and permissions, you have this nice option, I guess, you set up the defaults for that type of group. So for mission areas, our needs were a little different from cost centers, for instance. So by default, in a mission area, we would only have 2 or 3 roles. But within a cost center, it was a little more complicated because they wanted to, people that were members within a cost center would have a little bit more of a workflow. So you'd have editors and people that are authorized to approve things to actually get published. So you may have people that create content, but they don't actually get published until an editor approves it, that kind of workflow. We'll get into that again a little bit later. But it has a default set of permissions. But then you can, another really nice thing is you can actually override that. So you have this, the default set that says, oh, the cost centers, these types of people can do this type within a cost center. But then you can say, okay, my needs are just a little bit different, so we're going to override and have our own set of permissions with this specific cost center or this specific mission area. Another big win with OG was just again, with Contrib World and Drupal, we all know it's just indispensable. There were just a ton of add-ons that fall underneath OG itself. So these Contrib modules do nothing unless you're using organic groups in the first place. Workbench, anybody used Workbench by itself? Just regular old Workbench moderation. So this is specifically within organic groups. Workbench OG gives you kind of the same permissions options as far as like transitioning from one state to the next, from needs review to published, or sending something from needs review back to a draft to kick it back and say this isn't ready or whatever. So you have this workflow kind of stuff going on, but you have within the context of a group, you have the ability to maintain separate rules for that type of group. Scald OG, anybody use Scald for media? Yes. What do you think?
Yeah, it's good fun.
All right.
Honestly buggy sometimes, but
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Scald's fantastic. It's, for Drupal 7 in particular, it has 7. It's kind of going away for 8, but this is all D7, by the way. I should have said that up front, but this is all D7. We're looking at D8 in the future, but it's a whole nother task order. Yeah, Scald's a great media management tool in D7. If you haven't, we used it on this. We actually also used it on NASA.gov. NASA uses Scald as well, so it's pretty powerful. You can imagine the number of pictures and files and maps and all that crap that these kinds of guys, both of these organizations would use. OG Menu has group-specific menus. So I'm within this one New York Science Center, New York Water. I have my own menu, and it's only visible within the context of my group, and it's context aware. Organic Groups has this concept of a group context, so it can detect context based on different things. Most of the time, what we were using was taxonomy, which kind of ties back into the title, so that it knows, oh, well, if it's using this taxonomy term, it's this group. OG vocab is kind of the key to this talk a little bit. We'll get more into that later, but that's the thing that provides group-specific vocabularies and then terms within those vocabularies, obviously, and they're governed at the group level. So, and again, you got permissions for that too. So within the group, only this role can even create or edit existing taxonomies within this vocabulary. Views and panels. It's got, Panelizer. Damien, I don't know how much you've used Panelizer, but Damien's done a ton of work decoupling Panelizer from panels a little bit. And this was huge for the OG integration because now you have the ability within OG permissions to say, they can change the default content or default layout, things like that within the organic groups context. So I'm going to try and blow through these slides, by the way. I'd rather show you more than talk. So for each group, we needed an OG-enabled vocabulary. So we have a cost centers vocabulary. We have a mission areas vocabulary. So this goes back to the high-level kind of structure of the organization itself. So each term within that vocabulary represents a site. So you've got cost center vocabulary. Each one of the cost centers has a term. So New York Water Science Center, Wisconsin Water Science Center, this volcanic laboratory, every one of them, there's about 110 initially terms within the cost centers, and then you've got mission areas and programs and regions and all those other things. So the initial creation of those, we just got a spreadsheet from them. We created feeds to ingest those and create the terms. So if content is tagged, so any kind of content, whether it be an article or a science object or a map or a piece of software node or whatever, if it's tagged with that Science Center, for instance, it will just show up in that Science Center's page within the appropriate section in their world. So we're using taxonomy. So one thing that was a little weird, the site may or may not be ready to convert. This is a bit of a tangent, but this was something that we had to deal with, was you can imagine a listing of content, attributions of all the tags that have been, so all the cost centers, maybe it says New York Water, and then it says water as a mission area, and it also has, New York as the state and all these things. Well, if New York Water hasn't been converted to Drupal yet, when they click on that tag, we can't take them anywhere within Drupal because there's no content. There's not a home page within Drupal for them yet, right? So we have this hook URL Outbound Altar that we wrote, which is just what it sounds like. It takes the clickable link for that term, and we look at it and go, okay, well, does it have on field landing page type was a field on the term itself? And if it was flagged as external, then we rewrite the link to link off to their current site, which might be ny.water.usgs.gov, right? Until they're ready to convert. And when they're ready to convert, then we can flip them back to internal, and then it just goes to the normal Drupal flow, and so they kind of come back to their internal Drupal world. Does that make any sense? It's a little weird, but it was one of these things where they're halfway, some of them are converted, some of them aren't. We needed a way to keep them within Drupal sometimes and sometimes not. So each vocabulary must have a taxonomy term reference on all relevant content types in order to tag and include on term space. So, what was I trying to say with this point? I'm not real sure. Let me skip that. Panelizer to custom content. So Panelizer is just used to handle the layout on the term page. So theoretically, we're dealing with taxonomy terms that are groups. I mean, it sounds fairly straightforward that you can, hey, OG lets me flag entities, including taxonomy terms, as groups. So why wouldn't the term itself be the group, right? So this is where it all kind of went to pot, was this group-specific taxonomy. So we started trying to implement this, and OG vocab kind of blew it for us, unfortunately. So the whole thing about having vocabulary specific to that group, the long and short of it, skipping down to the last bullet here, is it didn't work with taxonomy terms as the host node, or the host entity, I should say. So OG vocab seemed to, and maybe we got this wrong and we didn't look at it hard enough, but we didn't have time. We were in full-on, build it and go mode. So it wouldn't work as taxonomy terms themselves as the host group node, right? So you couldn't just go to that taxonomy term page and that be their home page. All right, so this is backing up just a little bit. At a high level, what they needed for a home page was you have to have, now we have to have a node type, right? So we're going to use taxonomy terms as the group themselves, but now we're going to do an OG enabled, so it's a group content type of a node called cost center or whatever. And then we have a matching vocabulary with terms for each unit. So essentially you've got this one-to-one relationship of cost center node and a cost center term. So the node has a field on it, says primary term cost center, and then on the term it has a home page node. So they sort of talk to each other, or at least they're aware of each other in that way. Look at it that way. So we had to modify our approach with the feeds to also create the nodes and tie them together in a couple of steps. So we had to create the terms, export them, and then create the nodes with the term reference. So got a little convoluted there for a little while. But once it was set up, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. The node itself has a carousel at the top. They can build out a, put in an image and a, title and whatever else. And then they've got an intro, title, custom blocks is a neat little thing. But the main thing is that there is a primary term on the node, which is the term that anyone else can use to tag content. Is that confusing enough yet? So the long and short of it is, because of this problem with OG vocab not working on the terms directly, we had to do this kind of roundabout thing with node and taxonomy having this one-to-one relationship. So for every term in any one of those vocabularies we had intended to create, we had to create a node to go with it. And then the node is built to show all the content with that tag in various ways, and I'll show you that in a minute. OG menu gets created when you create the group node. It's got this nice little sub-module for default links, so it'll automatically create like a home link when you create the node itself. So it's got a home link in its menu. So each group node turns out to be the home page of the microsite. You've got all these different landing pages. So this is kind of how we decided to go about building the different sections within the home page. So you've got these different landing page types. So you have landing page science, landing page news, landing page maps, pubs, software, all the different kinds of group content, but then you needed a place to assemble them that also gave us the ability to have more than just the term itself. It's hard to explain this part. But basically it's just a landing page for all the content of a certain type that also has the same tag as the group's homepage node. Does that make sense? All right, so you've got all these different landing pages. It'll make a lot more sense when I show it to you live. So we did have a little bit of automation there. We built a build tab, so it had all these checkboxes, different landing page types, and if you hadn't created a landing page of that type, you could just check off the box, hit submit, it would create it for you. And the default Panelizer content and the views behind it would just, any content that had been tagged with your tag of that type, boom, you've got a page built out. And then create OG vocabularies with fields, skip that, import terms from spreadsheet. So there's a lot of manual steps, right? This is, if you are doing this by hand, even with that checkbox build tab that I talked about real quick, you had, you create the node, you got to create the menu, you got to create a link in the menu for each one of those landing pages you create. You've got the different taxonomies. They may have their group-specific taxonomies, their OG vocabs, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, we had to write this 20-page document, I'll even show it to you in a second, to just step them through, step by step, how do you build a new cost center, or even take one that's already there and make it live now because they're moving from their weird little subdomain world into the platform that we're working on. So it took a long time. It took about an hour, maybe more, depending on how focused you were, to build it out by hand. So we did build a tool for it eventually. It's a simple form. I'll show it to you in a second. It's just got a bunch of fields. You fill it out, hit submit. It builds everything you need. At first, we were only doing the cost centers. Now we are working on missionaries and programs, and then they have sort of abandoned the idea of regions and states throughout the site, which we're working towards. There's a special case for science support stuff because they're a little different. They don't have science as such. They're science support, so they're like the budget group. Obviously they're not going to have science or software. They're not going to have anything like that, so it's not really relevant to them. And again, it kind of brought the whole consistency across everything once this was all built out. Any questions real quick before I move to demoing, because I think it's way more fun and interesting.
Have you considered doing structuring the domain access to?
Yeah, that was one of the things we thought about at first, but again, you'd still have to build different subdomains, and you'd have to do all the separation of the content. Plus, you also have this, again, with the ability for any center to tag with any other center's content and kind of be able to cross tag, if that's a thing. So they really needed it to be all within just this one domain, and they didn't want any subdomains. Like, that was the other thing. Yeah, they just want it to be usgs.gov and a bunch of paths, right?
So that leads me to a follow-up question. How did you manage legacy content and URLs that are associated with that content?
Right.
Preventing like 404s and so.
Yeah. So the previous question real quick was about trying to use domain access. And again, that just didn't work because they didn't want subdomains and that kind of stuff. The question here was preventing things like 404s and links being wrong and things like that. When they're converting from their old site, they were required to manually create all of their content in Drupal. So it was completely up to them to ensure that their stuff linked off to a page that actually existed. If they want all their content in the new platform, it's up to them. I mean, and that was part of the problem. It's like it's completely impossible to migrate from off of a .NET and then this Java thing and then who knows what else was out there, different CMSs. I don't know. We just couldn't do it. It was impossible. So they didn't even ask us to try. They weren't interested in that. They were like, and it was a good chance for them. I used to have a bullet in there somewhere about this, but it was a good chance for them to curate their content because there was a lot of garbage out there that it just wasn't relevant anymore. So it was a good chance for them to kind of clean up too. Cool? Anything else? All right. Whoops, not that thank you yet. Hang on. All right, so straight to here. This is the tool that we built ultimately. It says import cost center because you can create one or you can convert one, as it were. So there's all of the centers at first are in there, right? Remember I talked about the Outbound URL Altar thing because these tags exist in the system for every single group that could exist. You have a term. So all these guys, all these. So every piece of content, let me just show this real quick, our content types. So whether it's, some of these are not relevant, but like on data and tools, let's get past these, news, maps, partners, you have the ability to tag those with any one of these centers or a mission area or whatever, right? So they already exist. And in fact, behind the scenes, every one of these already has a Drupal homepage and all that built out. It's just a matter of when they're ready to go live with it and they have their content ready. So you can pick from the existing terms, and you'll notice, well, you won't notice, but I notice that the ones that have already been converted, Wisconsin Water Science Center, for instance, is one of the first ones we did. They're not in the list, obviously, because they've been converted, so you can't pick them from here. That makes no sense. You give them abbreviation, which really only governs these OG vocabularies. So they, within their center, again, they may have a like their own little internal taxonomy, which we'll let them do. And I'll show you, this is just like a sample that they can use. And so you'll have topics, you might have, and I can't make this stuff up. So one topic, and then the themes that it lives under. So themes are actually the higher level thing within the center, and then the topics are below them. But you can, a topic can live within several parents, which is a little strange, but it's just the way it works. So they can upload this file in that format, submit it. It has a default thumbnail. This is Scald, in case you haven't seen this, so it doesn't work real well on this screen because of it's too small. There we go. That's better. All right, so it's got this nice little sidebar. I can say that this is my default thumbnail for these guys, all their themes, and there it is. And that's Scald. Scald's great because it actually uses views. So this is actually just a really slickly rendered view This is the exposed filters on the view itself, so you can manage what filters they have access to. This is all drag and drop. This is all the different types too. So we actually have audio files, galleries, images, videos. We're about to add webcams and a before and after image type here. So we're going to have more options to go with here. But they can drag and drop these. This field's only set up to allow images. So if I were to try and drag a gallery or a video into here, it won't let me. It's pretty slick. And then again, this is just another another vocabulary that they can create, and it has another sample file that they can use. And then you've got these landing pages that they can pick. So you may want, some centers may not want all of these, but then you pick the ones you want, you hit save after you actually fill out the form. AK water, something like that. And they have some standardization as far as what they want that to be, how they want that. And actually, I'll go ahead and add these themes and topics here so you can see what that does. And I'll save that. So then we have a quick confirmation that says, you're about to create these themes and topics. Notice I didn't upload a file for the non-theme topics, but it's going to create a vocabulary for them anyways. So they'll have one if they need it. But I do have themes and topics being uploaded. And then I've got all these landing pages it's going to build. Now, this is part of our problem here, is it does take quite a bit of processing time for this whole process to happen. There's a lot going on though. I mean, you're building a node, adding a taxonomy, or well, there's already existing, but you may be adding a new node, adding a new taxonomy term, referencing each other. You've got a new menu being added. You've got links being added to the menu. There's nesting of some of these menus. For instance, science topics always lives underneath science in the hierarchy of a menu. There's a few things going on there like that. What else? Creating these vocabularies up here, all the terms that got created from that CSV file. So a lot is going on all here at one time. And hopefully it won't take much longer than I can take this drink of water, maybe. And you can just kind of see what it does. Might throw an error too, we'll see.
So I'm guessing the unique words that you have stored in front of those terms are to prevent duplicates in the taxonomy vocabulary, or to have more control over the machine names that are created?
It's the machine names of the vocabulary. That's what some of the abbreviation in the previous step.
Right.
Yeah, that's just, and that's, you notice that this is the name that was thrown in front of themes, topics, and non-theme topics. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And we do have a check to make sure that it's unique, so they don't accidentally step on each other.
Creating content moving forward, they don't see vocabularies or term names that don't belong to that group.
That's where it gets fun. I'll show you that in just a second. In fact, I can do that while we're waiting on this. So I'm going to just create a new piece of news. Actually, not news. Let's do science objects, because that's kind of the most. I'll come back here since it's finished. So it's created my science center. It's ready to go. It's done. So I've got my OG menu. I'll show you back here. This is kind of the best place to look at it. So back here in Panelizer World, this is the default Panelizer content for a cost center node. And it's just going to pick up the default. Notice it doesn't have a reset link here, so it's using the default. So our default layout just has the title of the center here, the carousel full width across this page, and then custom intro text, custom blocks, a news pane, and Elasticsearch governs all our publications. That's a whole nother conversation. But this is one that's built out so you can see it. So this is Noroc. This is their awesome slideshow, which I love. This is our office. These are our coworkers. This is our rush hour. This is our happy hour. But they've got, so this is our custom block section. They've got the ability to generate a very specific combination of 2 info blocks and a list of links, or one of each, or they can only do certain things here. News, pubs is coming out of Elasticsearch. It's, again, another talk, probably altogether. But underneath the science section, which you can see on our newly built one as well, let me go back here. I'll go to both. So under our science section, you also have, oh, never mind, all of those themes that got imported as part of that. So now when they create content, so I'm going to refresh this since I did this probably a little ahead of time. When I create content, and you'll have to excuse this color scheme because it wasn't my idea, but they wanted this to be colored like this. So, but what's neat is, check this out. So now that I've converted Arkansas Water Science Center, when I select Arkansas, I also get their topics, non-theme topics, and themes to also, I can also tag this. Now I may or may not be a part of this group, right? So I may just happen to have worked on something because I'm in Texas or Oklahoma or whatever, something bordering Arkansas, and they just sort of overlap. So I need to be able to tag something with Arkansas Water Science Center, as well as the center that I work in, right? And so it shows up on their side too. Now they can still, they can edit it and pull that term off if they don't want it to show up on their site. But you know, there's not a lot of back and forth that happens there. But anyways, this is kind of the magic. We actually just finished this piece right here, where when you select a center, it actually gives you their OG terms as well, and you don't actually have to be part of the group to use these terms, which is interesting, because theoretically you should have to be a part of this group to be able to use these terms at all. Now you can't manage the terms, but you can now use them to tag stuff with. What else can I show you here? We've got this back to the home page again. Got this build tab I mentioned. So all of the science, the landing pages that I've already created are already checked off. Can't uncheck them, of course, because you can't get rid of them through this. This is only intended to add new ones. So I want to add these new landing pages to my site, and that'll take just a minute to do. So let's see what else. Any questions on what I showed so far?
The taxonomy pickup on the science center.
Yeah.
What are you using to do that? So is that like an instance?
Okay, so let's see. Oh, this particular widget?
Yeah.
This is improved Multiselect, I believe is what it's called. Improved Multiselect. Yeah. It's pretty nice. It works flawlessly from what we can. We haven't had any trouble with it.
And the logic behind.
Okay, yeah. So the logic behind it is there's JSON in a hidden field under here somewhere. I could show you the source, but basically it's got before you load the form, it's going to query and get the structure that it needs as far as this center has these 3 vocabularies and this center has these 3, and then there's just some JavaScript magic happening to hide and show. So what's crazy is, exactly, they're all on the page already. Let me show you that actually, because it's kind of neat. Go away. It's kind of hard to do on the side. Let me put this on the bottom. So down here somewhere. Let's see. That's another tab. It's up here. Here's this one. So here's the OG vocab. By default, the widget has every vocabulary that you have access to as a user in it. It's a really complex widget. And so it figures out, okay, this person that's logged in is a member of these 10 groups. And those 10 groups have these OG vocabularies. And it'll stick them all in this one widget for you. So what's really going on is this is here on the page. And it's hidden. See my display none that gets thrown in there. And magic, under the hood is just to hide and show those. It pulls out the ones that it needs when you select whatever center up here. Does that make sense? Pretty tricky. That wasn't me. I'll give all props to one of my colleagues. That was pretty slick work. Just a random thing. Don't ever use Drupal addjs on a form. Everybody learned this lesson? Drupal addjs, if you have a failure on your node submission, Drupal addjs doesn't load it again unless you do it like in the form rebuild side of things. But if you just do it as like part of the custom module that gets loaded on the page, Drupal addjs, it'll work. But then if I skip a required field before I hit submit, all that stuff that was working with this magic JavaScript that we were just looking at, none of that works anymore. So always use attached, the form attached component. There's form hash attached. Let's see what else. Yeah, so I'll just finish this real quick so you can kind of see status. Drag and drop that. How are we doing on time, by the way? And this could be anything. This widget will only show the groups that I'm actually belong to, but as an admin, I have all of them. This is moderation stuff, so it's workflow, and I'm going to miss this. This is always required for this particular content type. Published. So I tagged that with what? I tagged that with Wisconsin Water Science Center. So if I were to go over to here, this is a science object. And actually what's kind of weird is, and we think this is something we're fixing to work on in our, is that when you get to their actual science landing page, there actually isn't any listing of content. The only way to the content itself is through one of these themes or topics that we talked about, their OG stuff. So I think we're going to tack on a listing of actual objects that have just that center's term in there right now, because right now there isn't a way. Yeah. Let's see, what else can I show you? Cool, good on time. More questions, concerns, critiques?
So what is the publishing cycle? It looks like it's built into the flow.
It is. Okay, that's actually a good thing I can show you real quick. So after you create the group, this is the group tab. For those who don't know OG, and some of this will be new if you haven't seen some of these submodules too. Like there's the taxonomy link here, which is their groups, different vocabularies. The people menus is OG menu, so if they have a menu for their group, they'll be there. And again, roles and permissions are established at a content type level, and then you could override them. We have yet to find a use case for that for us, but this is our, roles and permissions are there, and then you've got, this is the permissions kind of at a higher level. So, what'd you ask again? Publishing cycle, yeah. So this goes back to workflow OG, how that ties into things. So down here at the very bottom of our huge permissions page, we've got these various permission sets. So moderate all content from draft to needs review. So each transition combination possibility has a permission. And so really all we have is a draft state, needs review, which is the default state, and then published. If you're allowed to, you can save it right as published, the way I did just a minute ago. But if I were not allowed to, I would have to just save it in a needs review state. And then an editor would come along, go through my workbench, hit the needs review tab, and approve it, or edit or kick back or whatever they need to do as far as that goes. Does that answer your question? So, and this, it was the need was simple. It was just a matter of, most people are going to create content and write it directly as published, but maybe, maybe they've got some, I don't think of what the word is, people that work there that aren't paid, interns or something, right? That they don't want them to directly create content, because who knows what they're up to. But the vast majority of users have the ability to just create content directly.
What about Drupal 8 for organic groups?
So yeah, Kaleem asked me that earlier, and I have actually touched it, but the new module is just called Groups, and I assume that it would have at least the vast majority of the basic functionality of organic groups. I don't know how far they've taken it. I haven't tried it, unfortunately.
There's a version now by Red's Chat
Yeah.
or OG.
Yeah, OG and groups are totally separate.
Are they?
Yeah.
I thought they were the same idea.
Groups a bit different.
Okay,
A little bit more scaled down.
interesting. Yeah, I haven't touched it, obviously. I haven't even looked. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in what a scaled down version of it looks like, you know. I guess we're basically out of time anyways, so unless there's not any more questions, we'll wrap it up. All right, thank you.